Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this Committee of the Whole meeting of the DeKalb City Council, September 9, 2019. Prior to our roll call this evening, I would remind anyone in the audience who would like to speak to any item on the agenda, or for that matter, any item that perhaps is not on the agenda. We only have 2 items tonight on the Committee of the Whole, to fill out a speaker request form, give it to our City Clerk, Lynn Fazekas, and she will get it to us. With that, I would ask our City Clerk, Fazekas, to call the roll, please.
Morris.
Here.
Fanouken.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Fagan.
Here.
McAdams.
Here.
Verbic.
Here.
Favor.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here.
8 present.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. We have 2 items. Well, actually, we have a number of items, but the 2 major considerations, further consideration of the framework of cannabis dispensaries in the city of DeKalb, and further consideration of the duties of the city clerk and deputy clerk. Are there any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda? If not, I would ask for a motion to approve tonight's agenda, please.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Alderman Morris, seconded by Alderman Favor. Discussion? If not, roll call, please.
Fanouken.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Fagan.
Yes.
McAdams.
Yes.
Verbic.
Yes.
Favor.
Yes.
Morris.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
8 aye.
Okay. Usually you put a mayor in front of that.
Mayor Smith.
There's an alderman and a mayor, so 2 of us Smiths. Okay. Public participation is next up on the item. And again, anyone here tonight who has filled out a speaker request form is more than welcome to speak to one of the considerations. If you'd like to wait until that consideration is discussed, we can do that. Or if anyone would like to speak to the item at this point, they may. Our first speaker that filled out a form was Dwayne Brown. Dwayne, would you like to speak now? Yes. Okay, please come forward. And try to hold these comments to 3 minutes or less, please.
Dwayne Brown. By the 1930s, marijuana was banned in 24 states. The newly minted Federal Bureau of Narcotics launched a campaign against the drug, and newspapers fueled hysteria with headlines like the 1933 Los Angeles Examiner's "Murderous Weed Found Up and Down the Coast. Deadly marijuana plant ready for harvest that means enslavement of our children." By 1937, Congress passed the Marijuana Tax Act, which effectively banned marijuana except for medical purposes. Today, we know the true story. Many parents are concerned that their teens will start using marijuana when it becomes legal in Illinois, January 1st of 2020. Let's look at Colorado, where it has been legal since 2012. Only 19% of Colorado teens use marijuana, even though it's legal for those 21 and over. This is below the national average. 81% of Colorado teens don't use marijuana with any regularity. Stop worrying. The University of Illinois has found that taxation and regulation of marijuana could create 24,000 new jobs and generate over $500 million in new revenue. The entire industry has the potential to create 300,000 new jobs by 2020. DeKalb has a problem of overtaxing and overregulating businesses. Let's not let this happen to this new industry. This will be a competitive marketplace. We don't need to impose the full 3% immediately. Let's start out at 1.5%. We may be able to take market share from cities such as Naperville, which the mayor is against dispensaries, and it has to go before a public vote. A lower tax rate may provide more tax revenue through more volume. If it doesn't, the tax can always be increased at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you, Dwayne. Okay, our next speaker request form, again, and this individual, Bernard Pepino. Bernie, you can speak either now or until, or at such time that we get to the consideration on the agenda. What would you like to do?
I'll wait for consideration.
You'll wait? Okay, very good. Mike Larson, would you like to speak now or at the time we ring?
I think now.
Okay, very good.
Mr. Mayor, Council, I'm going to give you a little bit of history about myself, just so you know where I'm coming from. February 2nd, 1943 was when I was born in the St. Mary's Hospital, just up a few blocks away. If you do the math, that's 76 years ago plus. After I graduated from Northwestern for 4 years, I enlisted in the Army, and I spent 6 years, 3 active duty, 3 in the reserves. And where I'm going to is, I spent a lot of time in DeKalb. We had a family business, Elmer Larson Incorporated. We had a quarry out on Barbara Green Road. The last few years that we did business out there, we were doing about $10 million to $12 million a year. Somewhere along the line, my father instructed me to get into the home building business, land development really, and then home building secondarily. So we started in Sycamore at Maple Terrace. Then we acquired about 160 acres on the west side of DeKalb, and I think we built about 300 lots out there, and they're all are sold except for one. Somebody wants a lot, I'll give you a heck of a good deal on it. Then we also built 96 single-family units of living in Cortland. We did some building in Waterman. Anyway, we had a lot of work, and we worked in a lot of different places. And for the most part, it was pretty easy to get along with the people in the staff positions here. And I just want to encourage you to not give up on that, but I mean, the people that are trying to do something right now need your cooperation so that they can get the job done and get in and get out and maybe make a profit. That's what we're all here for. Was kind of during the time when I was growing up, I met Jerry Smith and Bill Nicholas. Probably we know each other for close to 40 years, maybe. Long time. And I'm really here, I don't have to defend them, but I'm here to encourage you to give them all the cooperation you can. You know, the work that people come into the city hall to do something, and all of a sudden the clerk's office is only open Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for a few hours. That makes it a little difficult for somebody trying to do some business. And I think it's time that we recognized that we're competing with Sycamore in many ways, many respects, and I think they're winning right now in terms of home development, home building, and business development and things like that. And I think we need to welcome people into this town in order for them to build a business, build whatever they want to build, and do business here. I mean, we're faced with a problem at NIU with decreasing student body. I mean, that's certainly not helpful to the city. I mean, the people that come downtown, whether it was a bar or a restaurant or whatever, there's fewer of those that are coming to town.
Okay. If you could wrap it up, Mike, yeah.
Anyway, I think that's what my say.
Okay.
Cooperation rather than antagonism.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Barry Schrader, would you like to speak now, Barry, or wait until we get to the item on the clerk? You could speak now, okay?
just had my second cataract surgery, so I have to use these
Yeah, I
readers to see
understand.
what I'm saying. I felt it necessary to come here tonight, this is the first time in 10 years for me, to speak on an issue that could have been handled internally, hardly worth spending as much time as attracting new industry, business, and even marijuana dispensaries. I'm here as a private citizen and a voter, not a newspaper columnist or a Republican or a Democrat. I don't have the credentials or financial investment in this community as much as Mike Larson, which is very impressive, but I do have some background in business, personnel matters, and handling public policy. I'm not going to read you my whole resume, but I did serve as editor of the Chronicle for 4 years and moved out west where I was editor of 3 newspapers in the Bay Area. And then I was manager of public affairs for a large 1,000 employee National Defense Laboratory where I worked for 20 years. I have run for and was elected to public office 3 times, 12 years on the board of the trustees of a multi-campus college district with as much enrollment as Northern, including serving as its board president. I've been part of hiring college presidents, chancellors, and many employees in my lifetime, so I bring some seasoned experience to this subject. We moved back to our roots in DeKalb 12 years ago to retire because we like the quality of life in a small college town in the Midwest, not the idiosyncratic lifestyle of the Bay Area. My sons, one of our sons had also moved back here and now owns a home in DeKalb. He's been a supermarket worker, he's been an Uber driver, and I guess that qualifies him to run for city clerk. Council members, please take off your political hats and put on your thinking caps. You hired the best city manager that DeKalb has had in the decades since Kay and I have lived back here, a real professional who has held leadership positions in academia and city management. Now do you want to splinter his authority, hampering his ability to turn this city the way a professional knows how to? Think about it, and don't make the mistake of bowing to political pressure from a minority of the city's population. Do the right thing and let your city manager manage. You hired him to do that. Don't let political considerations replace your intelligence and common sense. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Barry. Okay, the next in the order of received is Peggy Hoyt. Peggy, do you want to wait until we speak about the city clerk? Okay, very good. Oh, he wants to speak now, okay. Bernard Propino, yes.
Good evening.
Hi, Bernie.
My name is Bernie Pepino. City Hall is open from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. In an era of great customer service, a citizen should expect there will be someone available from the city to perform the needed services without excuses. The City Council makes sure the mayor and city manager structure the city organization to perform at a level to ensure that whomever comes into City Hall leaves with the highest level of service possible. The mayor and city manager have definitely put the city on a positive pathway for growth and responsible stewardship of the tax dollars placed under their control, with City Council support, input, and approval. The city has pared down the management structure to reflect what private industry has morphed into decades ago, which means employees at all levels will have to be flexible and cover more duties as needed. Again, you have done an excellent job with the constraints placed upon you to operate the city. So my mind is boggled that the website for the city clerk conveys that her office hours are Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for a total of 8 hours a week. Does the city clerk want to infer that anything that requires the seal of the city of DeKalb can only be done during those hours? The passion to keep the city seal in a locked city clerk's office is an insult to the professionalism of the city clerk's staff, who need to have access to the city seal to perform their daily tasks and represents an unnecessary penalty to the citizens who need that service when they come to City Hall. So where was the problem that required this operational crippling measure to keep the seal locked up? The city clerk is a part-time elected position. If no one is elected for this position, the mayor can appoint a citizen to be city clerk and work at the pleasure of the mayor. The mayor appoints the city clerk and could also ask the city clerk to step down. An appointed city clerk has no recourse. The major task assigned to the city clerk is to take minutes of city council meetings and other required meetings as directed by the mayor, with a salary no more than 32 hours a month. There is a support structure working under and around the city clerk that makes this arrangement effective and efficient, with oversight of the city manager. The city clerk was asked to resign, and the city clerk should have resigned since she was as she worked at the pleasure of the mayor. The city clerk needs to resign. Or is this a ploy to try to make the city clerk a full-time elected position for political power? Actions such as this is a clear red flag that the current city clerk is a person the city doesn't want as their elected city clerk. Our city has operated very efficiently without an elected full-time or part-time city clerk. Mayor Smith and City Manager Nicholas, you have mine and my wife's full support. You do not get enough credit for what you and our city employees do every day. Please keep the city moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernie. John Watt. John, would you like to speak now or wait until the cannabis comes up on?
I'll wait.
You'll wait, okay. DK Kolars, would you like to speak now or waiting until we get to the clerk? You just answered my question, Dave.
Well, I was going to wait, but after hearing the last couple of speakers, I think Bernie was wrong when he said that an elected or appointed official to an elected position can be removed. If that were the case, I think any senator that was appointed to replace a position would have been removed also. From where I'm sitting, the system is broken. You have a city clerk that's elected, but you have a deputy that works for the clerk that does not answer to the clerk. The deputy answers to the city manager. And then you put the deputy clerk, whoever that might be, you put them in a very untenable position. How can you have two bosses? How can you work for two bosses? If the clerk tells you to do something and the city manager is against it, who do you listen to? You listen to the person that has the power to fire you. Therefore, the deputy clerk should not be considered as a deputy clerk. They should be considered as a city employee because they do not work directly for the clerk. The clerk has no power to manage their job. And so I worked at NIU for almost 30 years in a few departments. I've never seen a situation where you had to answer to one boss while working for another. That just does not make sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, those are the individuals who wanted to speak at this time. We will now move into the considerations for the evening. And the first is a consideration of the framework for cannabis dispensaries in the city of DeKalb. Again, just for the information for the public, for those watching tonight, we will make no firm decisions tonight other than to provide staff some direction as it relates to this in our second consideration this evening. So with that, I'd like to call on our city manager, Bill Nicholas, to speak to this item, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The council held a committee of the whole meeting on August 12th and reviewed the current state of the law concerning private consumption and possession of cannabis in the state of Illinois. And as a result of that discussion, the council indicated its willingness to revise its current regulations for medical cannabis sales to encourage such legal facilities and put it to the city manager to bring back some general considerations that you could put into a framework, and then another step removed from where we are tonight would be to come up with a draft ordinance. And I thought it would be prudent to, first of all, suggest the rules and regs as they currently exist, which I detailed in the background for you tonight, and then also to suggest some parameters for your conversation tonight. And I've done that as well. I'm not going to read through the whole list. You've had a chance to do that. I think you would agree that our current regulations have been discouraging, not necessarily encouraging, of medical dispensaries. And so what I had proposed were some general parameters that might be more encouraging based on the encouragement that the council was giving for this particular end. And I'll just read through those very quickly for people who might be looking in. And one of those considerations would be to make dispensaries, whether medical or recreational, permitted use in any light commercial or general commercial district. And since this has come out, we did have one issue that arose, and I think it can be resolved as we get toward a draft ordinance. In the more restrictive current regulations, we had allowed, you could have a dispensary in the light industrial zoning district by special use, and I would, unless you think otherwise, bring that back. There just may be some people actually looking at a few sites there. I suggested that it might be special use because in an industrial area, light or heavy, this would be a commercial use that might appear to be a little out of place, and so a special use does give the framework for public hearing, further consideration to allow people who are adjacent property owners to weigh in. But that's a detail we can discuss tonight or at a later point. I have proposed that dispensaries be allowed in multi-tenant spaces rather than standalone spaces, much like any other commercial use in the light industrial and general commercial. Also that dispensaries be permitted as long as they are a minimum of 250 feet from any public or private preschool, school, licensed daycare, and the rest of the categories that I have listed. Allow signage as for any commercial use. Basically, you can see the thrust here. Is this a commercial use? Do you want to have it permitted in the city of DeKalb? Therefore, would you consider having it under basically the same commercial guidelines as other commercial uses? And so I'll stop there. We have a busy cow tonight, and I just wanted to read through some of the principal considerations before you, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
No, I certainly appreciate the background. Scott and I were talking, and the background was just excellent on this particular item, Bill. I think what we have to point out, too, that in your first guidelines, which were voted on in 2015, a lot of water has gone over the dam, if you will, since then. I mean, we've had a governor who...
We're up in smoke.
Yeah, it's gone up in smoke, right. So, and given the fact that, you know, this council has given initial guidance to you to move forward with this, and to, again, keep into consideration where we are located and what is located, namely the university in our community, I think that these probably, your parameters that you offered certainly make sense to me. But what makes sense to me doesn't necessarily make sense to everybody here up on this dais, so I would turn it over to any discussion. What Bill is looking for tonight, I think, is to get some kind of a consensus on the parameters and if they make sense for this council going forward. Alderman Fagan.
Bill, I believe it's I was just looking at, that's one that jumped out at me. The deliveries of product may occur as with commercial establishments. And I think we ought to look at it from how we handle our liquor license. Are you saying we talking about allowing marijuana to be delivered?
Well, it obviously has to come from another licensed grower, a licensed establishment. The way we have it set up now is it basically has to come into a protected area, almost like a sally port in a police station. You know, it's like the Brinks truck brings it in, the door closed behind it, you can then unload it, and then it's let. But what I'm proposing is that this is something come in small boxes, I don't know what size boxes, but it would be handled like any other commercial. We have drugs that are, you know, cancer drugs and other things that go to drugstores every day that are more toxic than whatever's going to be delivered to these stores.
Okay. I guess what I should have been more clear on is delivery to the customer.
Oh, I see.
And we've got delivery.
Yeah.
We're delivering drugs.
Yes.
We can't deliver alcohol.
Right.
So
This is just to the commercial establishment, to the
Right.
licensed commercial establishment, not home delivery.
Okay.
Just because there are a half a dozen types of cannabis establishments, which I noted toward the end of my background, the different kinds of growing centers, the dispensaries, of course, the infusers where you're making Gumbies and things like that. All I was talking about with dispensaries, how they get the goods that they sell. And I was trying to suggest, and
Gotcha.
I'll follow your pleasure on this, but it not be as rigorously protected as we have currently.
Any further comments? Alderman McAdams.
Well, I favor a vibrant and warm climate to welcome our new businesses to DeKalb. But I also recognize that the legislation in Springfield is incomplete and that the city has done a good job of handling the areas that we can cover. We look forward to more information after the legislature revisits the matter in the fall. And then I'd like to see the city bring it back again for another vote. But as far as it goes, I'm for less restriction than more.
Thank you. Alderman Fanouken.
Just one of the concerns have heard is just allowing dispensaries in a close proximity to campus. And it's not just, the closeness, but also the perception of it being close to campus too, that I think could be perceived as an issue. And, does the inclusion of the word school, does that also include NIU? That's the question here. So, excuse me. So I think that's something that we need to have clarified in the language as we put together. How are we going to treat NIU as a school or or some different entity? Just that we've heard some concerns about it being particularly close to campus at a couple of particular establishments. And I know that's going to be something that we can talk about to establish that.
Thank you. Alderman Verbeek.
Conversations I've had and research done really point to this as a favorable outcome for the city. But one issue has been smell. So how do we, outline a practice of making sure that the smell is contained on a particular site? You mentioned a multi-tenant commercial property. Well, the smell is, from what I understand, very difficult to contain in a commercial environment, even in a, situation where you have businesses adjoining to one another. Do you want your business to smell like that, or should the site for the dispensary and whatnot, should they have to contain that smell on their site? And I believe that we should have some language that calls out to that.
Alderman Morris, are you raising your hand? Yes, okay.
So I guess I'd like to consider the university concept too. I think I would love to hear more feedback from both the community and from the council of what you think about having this near campus, one, and then two, to address what Alderman Verbeek was mentioning. I've been to dispensaries in other states and there's no scent. So maybe associated with smoking it, actually, there may be a scent, but I think this outlines that they're not smoking on site. But I could imagine with a craft grower or a cultivation center, we might be experiencing a very different thing that may have scent, which is interesting. I hadn't thought of that problem with those. But I would imagine that those locations may not be the same types of locations that we would be expecting with a distributor. So.
Thank you. Alderman Favor.
So I don't think we got into much discussion about how much the distance between dispensaries. I know in Section 4 or Item 4 of the 2015 code, it was 2,500 2,500 feet, which is quite a distance. I'd be curious what the rest of the council feels in terms of, like, gaming establishments. We've set those at 1,500. I don't know, no two within 1,500 feet of each other, if that's where we're thinking, or I certainly don't want it near a school, as has been talked about. I'm not 100% in favor of the marijuana dispensaries. However, I think it's a grand experiment that I don't think we can stop it. And I think we should put the tax on it at our full 3% that we're allowed to tax it. We're going to end up paying more than, according to the letter from the gentleman, the mayor from Colorado that the person suggested, we're going to pay more in social issues than we're going to collect in taxes. So, I think it's going to happen. I mean, well, it's going to happen. People are already smoking marijuana today, so it's not like it's not happening today. And according to his letter, it didn't get rid of the black market for marijuana. It still continues to be there. With all the taxes and things, it's cheaper to buy black market marijuana than it is to buy legal marijuana. But again, I think it's just I think it's a big experiment. We'll see how it goes. But I don't want to. We want to be business friendly. We want to, again, put it within, if we can have multiple dispensaries or whatever. Again, I'm also curious to see what the feedback from NIU is as well, in terms of how close they would want to see a dispensary within the university.
Alderman Smith.
I'm a little skeptical about the whole thing. Obviously, my previous life for over 30-plus years in law enforcement leads me to that. But I think it's like everyone has said, it's a reality. As far as the 2,500 feet, I'm curious to how many they're going to allow, and what will that do to the market price? I mean, is it set? Do we know, Mr. Nichols, if they've set a market price, or if that
You can allow, you can limit the number, like you do with video gaming, which is now 6, based on the state guidelines.
The current statute does have a 1,500 square foot distance between dispensaries. And we are allowed to limit the total number. We're allowed to limit which zoning districts they can go into. And we're allowed to prohibit it altogether if that's the desire.
Can you hear John back there?
I'm not sure.
There's a little green light there, John.
Yeah, I don't have a
and if
green
you
light.
push that,
It's on.
no, down at the base.
Right.
Down at the base.
technical difficulties?
Okay, you guys. share.
Okay, now we're start again. That's better. The statute does provide for a 1,500 square foot, I'm not square foot, distance between medical or not, any recreational dispensary. It does provide us the ability to prohibit it altogether. It also provides us the ability to limit it to certain zoning districts, of course, which is the way most people do it. It does provide that we can limit the total number in the village as well. So there are a lot of tools you have in the toolbox to deal with this in a way that you see fit.
The question, I guess, who regulates the price?
The market.
Okay, so we could have a competitive market.
Yeah.
Very competitive.
Well, it's going to be heavily taxed.
Right.
Which is as much to do with setting the price as anything.
Thank you.
Okay. It appears to me that there are a couple of places where we're going to have further discussion. One is the distance from a school or a licensed daycare or anything. keeping in mind Alderman Fanouken's point of, is Northern Illinois University, okay, should we consider that a public school? Do you see what I mean?
Mayor, we do have an answer to that.
Oh, okay.
The statute does allow us to put reasonable time, place, manner on the locations where they can be, and does include universities and colleges as what we could identify as a sensitive use to which that would apply.
So you're suggesting
Yeah,
that
we would have the ability to say-
we would be treating NIU a little bit differently than we would be treating Little John School?
No, we can treat them, if you identify your areas as sensitive uses, your school, you could treat a university as a school and view that as a sensitive use to which you want to have a distance setback applicable.
Alderman Smith.
John, maybe Chief Petrogallo, I'm going to throw him under the bus on this one. John, would the 1,000-foot rule apply to the university? Is that changed statutory for all drugs?
I don't think it changed.
Okay, so, okay. So what I'm thinking is the sale, use, et cetera, or sale within 1,000 feet of a university would probably apply on our current statutes, drug statutes.
That would be for the unlawful sale?
Okay.
Is where that 1,000 feet that I think you're referring to
Correct.
applies.
Okay, thank you.
I think the other thing that we had talked about, and I know Alderman Morris, you want to speak again, to Alderman Verbeek's point, the suggestion here is that we would allow dispensaries in multi-tenant spaces, and that goes right back to your question, Mike, I think, about having a business next to a business that deals with dispensing. However, from what I understand here, in a dispensing environment, we wouldn't see people smoking the cannabis. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, but there's still smell, there's still an odor. that
Or the
could come
smell
from
of the product
a
itself. I see.
dispensary, a cultivation center, whatever the topic or the way that you define it is irrelevant. The notion is just to keep the smell contained
Yeah.
on the site,
I
whatever
see.
that business is related to marijuana.
Okay. I see, okay. Alderman Morris, did you want to speak to this again? Yeah,
Sure.
please.
I was just going to say, I don't know if we want to even broach the topic of thinking of how we want that tax distributed yet, because I think it's a good idea to be considering a certain portion of that, or a significant portion of that, going to law enforcement and maybe even fire. You know, thinking of, okay, perhaps we put 1% toward law enforcement, 1% toward fire, and then the other 1% toward, I don't know, city stuff. So, yeah, general fund. But I just want to throw those ideas out there. 'Cause I
Is that
think
something
that's-
that we could do?
You can designate general revenues as you wish, but normally as part of the budget process, you decide
Okay, good.
what you want to
Good.
do.
Excellent suggestion.
Yeah, and maybe revisit that consideration if we find that we have, like, money coming out of our years, so.
City Manager Nicholas, do you have enough sense of where?
Yeah, I do. I just wanted to ask a
where
few
we are?
things so that we
Yeah.
don't, we're sort of
Yeah.
wondering for 2 weeks. One, thank you for reminding me. I meant to say something about the tax rate, and that will be something that you'll have a chance to reflect on. I'll put something in there, and then you can kick it around, say, no, lower it or raise it. The distance from NIU is, and Alderman Fanouken and I talked about this morning, it's more of a brain teaser than it might appear, because happily, NIU is a large land area right smack in the middle of our community. That means the backyard of a lot of commercial establishments backs up to the NIU campus. In fact, think about it, pretty much from the Kishwaukee Bridge west to the NIU physical plant and workshops on the west end. That's a long way. Everything on the north side of the street backs up to NIU. Now, some of that are playgrounds and the stadium and parking lots and so forth, but taken literally, unlike with a school where, it's a small little donut and you can consider, and for the most part, particularly our elementary schools are in residential areas. But so that's a little tricky to take out basically one of the strongest commercial areas for possible location. But I'll review that when I bring it back to you, and you can decide which one. I'll give you a couple options. You can look at it and see what you want to do.
Also, when this was first coming down the pike, and after Heather Steens and Kelly Cassidy, two legislators who shepherded this through for Governor Pritzker in Washington, I reached out to Northern, and so I've had conversations with them. They were involved in the meeting we had in Sycamore with the law enforcement officers, et cetera. And Bill, unless you tell me otherwise, I don't know if you've gotten any official, was this simply someone asking you in an official capacity from NIU, or was it something
It was
just
during, it was during, excuse me, it was during a conversation that we had regarding a number of topics with the city and the university. I wouldn't say it's an official request,
Okay,
but.
okay. I think what we need to do, though, based on your concern, and Alderman Morris also said we ought to get more input from Northern, that we reach out to them and get some kind of a stance on whether or not they, like this council, agrees with what we've talked about tonight. Would that make sense? I mean, they're a key player in all of this, so. Okay, any other discussion? Bill, if you have enough
I do.
fodder for bringing something back on the 23rd, is that possible?
Yes, it is.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Let's move along to our next consideration.
Mayor?
Did you fill out a speaker request form? Okay, Ed, go ahead.
I won't take
Okay.
I remember working for you many years ago, and unfortunately, was my.
You want to speak into the mic there,
That's right. I was
Ed?
there when Bill Rader died. It was a sad day indeed, I'm telling you, he's a good friend of mine. I wanted to talk, I didn't plan to, but I think I need to clarify some of the issues that were brought up. It might help in your decision. First thing, the state of Illinois made a decision to enter the cannabis business for, one, to get the trafficking of drugs out of the dark corners of our society into the open. And this is going to help that man right over there, because there is a traffic of drugs in this city, and unfortunately, it's there. According to the state documents on this, 8% of the population of the state of Illinois are engaged in cannabis consumption, which is actually half of Colorado. Colorado is 15%. So I want to tell you, it's there. So if the city of DeKalb doesn't want to go down this way, they can go right to Aurora, or they can go to Rockford. So it's going to be there no matter which way we go. Second issue, if you look at the whole concept, there's several stages in this, and we've done a lot of research into this. There's the cannabis recreational retail store, and there's the growers. The growers have the issue of the smell. Most of the product that comes into a cannabis retail recreation are tightly sealed, delivered by approved distributors. They're not an open bag of cannabis bugs in there. Everything's under control, because one of the requirements by the state of Illinois to get this is a quality control security plan. There's nothing in there that everything has to be documented, everything has to be brought in correctly to a secure place, and there is no smoking in these places, and there's no free samples. So one of the issues here is, could I have my neighbor really pissed because I'm smoking? No, there is no odor coming from these products, because they're all tightly controlled, okay? One of the issues state of Illinois is pushes tight security and control of this. The other thing too you may have to be aware of, when you come into a cannabis recreation, you have to prove your ID that you're over 21, and the store has to document that you're a consumer of that. You can't just come in and pay $30 and walk out the door. So there is an improved security of what's happening. Now, what I'm going to say is kind of goes back. When we had Police Chief Majestic, when we had Police Chief Donnie Burke, when we had Police Chief Bill Fython, and our predecessor, we've always taken the approach that a police can come into our place anytime they want and see anything they want. We should take that approach in the city of DeKalb. There's nothing hidden that that man should know about.
Why is that? Because that improves the security of this town, which is an issue. And the last thing I want to talk about is, how do I say this? There is a change in our society, unfortunately. I'm not for drugs personally, but it's happening. And we need to accept that's part of the future. And we can take the position of many cities that says, we don't want it, we don't want our kids in it, we don't want nothing to do with it. That's fine. But the reality is, our children are doing it. And we need to bring it out of the dark shadows of people that are not paying your taxes, they're not abiding by the law enforcement, and we need to make it open so we know what's going on.
Okay, thank you, Ed.
And the last one, if the city does not approve, the person that applies cannot even be considered as an applicant. As you know, the state is the only one that approves an application. So if you don't apply because you don't have city approval, there is no discussion. So you must approve it to even get the conversation going.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Thank you, appreciate it. And if you'd fill out a speaker request form and do give it to Lynn, and at least we'll have it on file then. Alderman Verbeek?
Mayor Smith, Mr. Bailly mentioned security, and should we include some kind of language, since it's really unknown about vaping? Is there anything we can do locally? Again, there's bad reports about vaping, and I'm not sure what role we could have to, I guess, reassure the safety of our citizens.
Separate from the marijuana piece, or?
Well,
Do you mean vaping marijuana?
No.
Vaping marijuana. And again, I don't know all of the research, but some of the recent reports have been troubling.
I think, yeah, I heard a report just last week, and in vaping, so a lot of young people are thinking they're just basically gargling water vapor, but we're finding now the impact can be serious on young lungs, not even young lungs. And inhaling anything can do that. That hasn't been part of the consideration that's been before you on marijuana, whether people should be smoking or not smoking and so forth. I think at the very least, we can control what happens in a dispensary, and most places are saying it's not going to be like a coffee shop where you come in, have a couple J's and leave. It's just going to be as Ed was saying, you buy the product, it's in enclosed plastic or other containing materials, and you leave. So I guess at this point I don't have an educated opinion about the impact of vaping, but I think when I come back, I'm definitely going to suggest that we not allow the use of the product on the site of the dispensary.
Okay, I believe then that we have given this as much consideration as we could tonight. We've provided our city manager with some direction. We're in unknown territory. I mean, we really are, and I think that even the state of Illinois is in unknown territory. I mean, just before I walked in here tonight at 4:30, we received another memo from the Illinois Municipal League, which is following this very, very closely in Springfield, and they are sort of our lobbying group, if you will, for many of the municipalities. So stay tuned. We will work hard on this, and we will try to do the right thing for the citizens of the city of DeKalb on this. Okay, so we have our next consideration is further consideration of the duties of the city clerk and deputy clerk. Let me make a comment, and then I'm like to turn it over to City Manager Bill Nicholas and Council Member Carolyn Morris, who dutifully agreed to work with me over the last couple of weeks. Since the last council meeting, Carolyn and I have had meetings with City Clerk Fazekas, Executive Assistant, former Deputy City Clerk Ruth Scott, City Manager Bill Nicholas, and we have come up with some of the material that I think all of you received in background, not only from City Clerk Fazekas, but also from City Manager Bill Nicholas and also from Ruth Scott. So with that, I'd like to ask City Manager Nicholas to speak to this item, and then I'd like Alderman Morris to speak to this item. After their discussion, or after their points, we'd be happy to entertain any audience participation, and we do have 3 or 4 folks who have indicated they'd like to speak. So with that, City Manager Nicholas, please.
Very briefly, Mayor, at the meeting on August 26th, the council was particularly interested in a number of things, actually, but one in particular, and that was the state statutory parameters for the clerk's office. For your reference tonight, I presented information that was provided me by Matt Rose and John Donahue, our city attorneys. I won't detail, you've had a chance to review it. I think I would just ask Mr. Donahue if he has anything he wants to add. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholas. Fundamentally, the duties of the clerk are largely ministerial in nature. You are the board, you and the council are the ones that set the policy and vote on each matter before you, and it's the clerk's ministerial job to then record that and document that through the minutes she prepares that ultimately come back to you for approval. Also, things like stamping, sealing documents, attesting to signatures, permits, construction permits, building permits, liquor licenses, things like that. Those also are largely ministerial events and things that the clerk needs to do. They do not give the clerk a right to substantively get involved in the decision that's made. So, for example, if a clerk is asked to stamp a building permit and give it and attest to that it was an action of the village, it doesn't give her the opportunity to then second guess the decision or what into that building permit. It's just a ministerial job, like a notary, just to document that this is the official action of the village. Also, I think it's important to note that statutory duties of the clerk are not necessarily exclusive to the clerk's office. For example, the clerk has her duties by statute, and those are there and should not be taken away. But it doesn't mean that you, as the council, cannot run the village in the way that you best see fit for your customers and for your businesses. So if the clerk doesn't have to be the only person who can stamp a permit or use the seal. It's within your prerogative to allow other people that right to do that, and there's nothing in the law or the statutes or anything that exclusively gives that authority to the clerk. Although that is her duty, one of her duties, if you see fit to feel the village should have that available. Every second the village hall is open, you have the ability to do that, and you're not necessarily stepping on the toes of the clerk by doing it if you have that done when a clerk is not here to do that. So those are the main points I wanted to make to the board. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
City Manager Nicholas, do you want to speak to this item any further before we turn it over to
No.
Alderman Morris? I think one of the things, and I don't want to take words out of your mouth, Carolyn, but I think one of the things that we agreed upon after having met with all parties is that we're probably not going to have a draft document in our own minds tonight going forward. What we do hope to have is to gain enough consensus and enough direction so that we can come back on the 23rd and come up with something that is satisfactory to all of the parties. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so if I did take words out of your mouth, I apologize, but Carolyn Morris, our first ward alderman.
So I guess I want to give everyone an overview of what we've done to make progress in this. As Mayor Smith mentioned, we had many meetings over the past couple of weeks, and many different arrangements of people were in these meetings. So I had meetings with the mayor and the city clerk, and I had a separate meeting with the mayor and the executive assistant. And then we had a separate meeting with the city manager, and we did multiple iterations of these sorts of sets until this past Friday we had a meeting of myself, the city clerk, and the executive assistant, Ruth Scott. So we finally had a meeting of the three of us, and we had a great meeting. I feel like we made leaps and bounds of progress. Over the course of the 2 weeks, I was given documents from both the city clerk, Lynn Fazekas, and the executive assistant and deputy city clerk, Ruth Scott. I spoke with them extensively. I got both of their inputs in writing, and with the mayor's help, the mayor with the city clerk's help, the three of us went through one of the documents line by line, the original, and worked on amending it. That was one of our first steps that we took. But then we were thrilled to have input from the deputy city clerk, Ruth Scott, and she offered some documents that the city clerk, Lynn Fazekas, was thrilled to see that sort of outlined everything that she does. So basically, we've made leaps and bounds of progress, I feel like, over the course of the last 2 weeks, just making sure that we understand fully what this role actually entails, everything that everyone does in the name of these two roles, both as deputy clerk and as city clerk, and which parts are important and what needs to be done moving forward. So I think what's most important is that I intend to, as we try to clean up the old ordinance and draft something that is more modern, more what we're hearing that people want, and more accurate to what the duties actually are. As we're doing that, I'm seeking the input of both the city clerk and the deputy clerk at this time. The city clerk has added to her days 2 days of the week, so she is now coming in 5 days a week. And I asked the deputy clerk, does that work? And she's only coming in for an hour or so on those extra days, but it sounds like they're at a point where it works and it is functional, and we've made big progress.
Yeah, what we have here, we have a municipal code, Chapter 3, that outlines the duties of our city clerk. That aligns in some respects with the statutory duties. The statutory duties being those outlined by the state of Illinois for clerks. And that's what we've been working on, crafting, striking things out, making some changes, and both Executive Assistant Ruth Scott and City Clerk Lynn Fazekas have come up with excellent documents, and that's what I think we're trying to craft now. Now, having said that, is there any further discussion? And then we'll turn it over to a few folks who would like to speak from the audience.
Jerry, if we could, we've heard from Bill, we've heard from council, we've heard from Carolyn yourself. Lynn, is there anything that you'd like to add to this discussion at this point that the rest of council would find useful and practical?
I would say that if council were to go through the documents that I have provided, I would be very glad to answer any questions associated with them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me ask one further question, if I may. Has Alderman Morris fairly represented the seemingly compromise that we're headed towards, at least up to this point?
Alderman Morris has been, in my view, after some 90 days of difficulties, a breath of fresh air. And I would say that some progress has been made insofar as I feel like I'm dealing with a person of good faith.
All right, one more follow-up, if I may,
Sure,
Mr. Mayor.
absolutely. You've got the mic, Bill.
All right. Are you sure you want to say it that way? Do you feel there are any statutory items in the state statute that we will not be able to overcome? Is there any real stumbling block there as you foresee it?
Yes, and I have actually, we talk a lot about duties. We talk about statutory duties, we talk about non-statutory duties, and those are all things that can be changed. But some of the statutes are not about duties, but they're about the powers of the office. And so the biggest stumbling blocks are duties associated with the powers of the office. That would be the power of the city seal, and that would be the power to supervise one's own deputies.
Okay, but as I understand the state statute, that the deputy clerk should be able to have use of the seal as we, would go forward.
This is something that I would have absolutely no objection to if I were the supervisor of the clerk's duties.
Alderman McAdams?
On that same note, I spoke with a couple of the previous clerks who indicated that whether they agreed with your decision or not to restrict access to the seal, that it was in fact under your purview. That is something that it's up to, one former clerk said to me, I wouldn't do it the way that Lynn's doing it, but it's her choice to make, and so we have to respect that. So in regards, where are there areas where we can find mutual ground?
Well, actually, excuse me.
Sure.
One of the difficulties is that there are still misunderstandings about what has happened over the past 7 years. So people fault me about only being here 8 hours, or closer to 10 now. However, I'm the first clerk to have set any office hours at all since Liz Peerboom was here in 2013, 2014. And Liz had about the same number of office hours that I had. She came in regularly. Her deputy clerk was Diane Wright. She did authorize Diane Wright to have the seal, and Diane kept the seal. However, Diane will tell you that she never had to use it because Liz was in often enough for this to happen. And one other thing that I would really like for people to remember is that my first 10 months on the job, there was no problem. I was aware of absolutely no problem with impeding the workflow. And had I known of any problem in those first 10 months, I would have tweaked my schedule. There are emails saying that as soon as I realized that some people did have a problem, that I would look at, let's talk about me redoing my schedule. So I don't even know where this came from to this day. One day there was a problem, the next day there was not a problem. I thought we were doing everything in a timely manner. Now, if we really want the kinds of things that I would like to see changed now, take the imprinted facsimile of the seal off of the licenses, because that's an artifact of days when I felt like I knew who was signing what. And I think it would be a good idea to take the pre-printed seal off of the licenses. If something's to be sealed, let's seal it. There are things that we could do scheduling-wise. There are things that we could do hiring-wise. What I would like to see, since it is my, in advocating for the elected clerk, which I am, I would like to see a bridge. The plan would be a bridge to 2021, and the overwhelming public opinion that an elected clerk in DeKalb is a full-time clerk. I truly believe that that is what the people want, and I am so confident of that, that if somebody wants to run a referendum on it, full-time versus part-time, please do that.
Alderman Fagan.
So, on your discussions, will there be will the deputy clerk be able to use the seal when the city clerk is not here. Has that been agreed upon?
When we spoke Friday on this specific question, I asked that between the city clerk and the deputy clerk. And the city clerk at that time had asked the deputy clerk, am I coming in frequently enough to do all of the sealing that needs to be done every day? And the deputy clerk responded that the city clerk was coming in frequently enough to complete all of the sealing that needed to be done every day.
But we're right back where we were. Because, you know, granted, we're all politicians, that was an excellent answer, by the way. I mean, I'm not, but what I'm just saying is, we have, the whole root of the system of the problem here is getting business done. And I'm not getting it. I'm not getting the lack of trust. I don't care who the boss is. I think to go over and say that Ruth or anybody in that capacity that's done that kind of work that she's done, to question. I think we've got business people here that come in and say, you know, we need somebody to come in, and when I come in to do business with the city of DeKalb, and I've got to wait, but if I go to Sycamore, I got somebody there full-time.
Sure, some of the
To
things.
do that. Now, let me just say another thing about this full-time position and hiring other people. That's not going to come out of our budget. That is going to be taxed on the backs of the taxpayers. We can't cut any more. We can't take a guy off a snowplow. We can't do any of that. And so I guess I don't understand the lack of trust, and all of a sudden we have a problem now.
What's been interesting in our conversations, actually, one thing that we brought up, I believe just Friday, was the idea that some of these documents that are being sealed might not need to be sealed, which was fascinating. We were looking at it, I mean, is that correct, Lynn? Does that sound accurate? I feel like we identified at least one thing where we were like, I don't know if this needs a stamp on it at all. Does that sound right? No?
It's possible, but I wouldn't say that that's what we do need to do, I think I know where you're coming from. What we do need to do is we actually need, and I actually started doing this, is to go through the DeKalb Municipal Code and figure out who's supposed to be issuing what. Because a lot of the practices, we've gotten away since 2012, a lot of the practices have gotten away from what's actually in the municipal code.
Right.
So the code gets changed, the practices, you know, when the clerk's office was gutted, everything was parceled out. It was parceled out to the executive assistant, parceled out to the management analyst, parceled out to various people in the finance department. And so there are a lot of housekeeping issues that we need to do right along with looking at section 3.14 of the code.
Right. So I think we need to, one of the things that on the very first day when we started this process, we identified a portion in the code where it said the salary would be reviewed annually, and we agreed that the duties also should be reviewed, maybe not annually, but every 2 years or something like that. But the salary and the duties both need to be reviewed collectively rather than one without the other.
So I guess my question is, do we have, if a person comes in and the city clerk isn't here, can the deputy clerk, 4 weeks from now, we come to agreement, will the deputy clerk be able to put the city seal on?
My hope in working with the two of them is that eventually the trust will be rebuilt so that that is an option. But the city clerk may tell you that that'll never happen. So
no, and we did have an arrangement where my former deputy had my express permission to sign off on solicitors' licenses. And the reason for that is the one type of license that actually does have a short turnaround at times, if the background check is already done, and so on. But most of these licenses, people can't just come in and get a license. There is an application process. There are inspections. There are background checks. There are very few licenses where you can come in the city of DeKalb anyway, to get that done in one day. The solicitor's license was an exception, and that is why I gave my permission for the deputy to sign off on them.
I understand that, and I don't mean to interrupt. I get that. I mean, we all know how that all works.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that you do, actually.
Okay, well, thank you. So anyway, what I'm saying is, if we pass something on a Monday night, and somebody comes in, gets that license the next morning, and we can't do that, or can we? Because right now, it sounds like we can't do it unless you're here.
I'm here on Tuesdays.
If I come in at 9 o'clock on Tuesday, you're going to be here?
No, I will not.
Okay,
And
so that's my
would you-
point.
no.
That's what my question is. We're not getting anywhere, and when we had this discussion, you and I, and we're not getting anywhere tonight, because this is just going to be a vicious circle. Now, I think you've done a great job, and if you can do more, that'd be great. But as we stand right now, I don't see where we were at at the last meeting.
I think we have peace, and I think we have an environment that's no longer toxic. I think that that's the big difference right now. And so we had agreed on Friday to make, and I apologize, Bill, I didn't tell you this, I think I forgot, but we agreed to have a regular meeting weekly, every Friday, a 30-minute meeting between the city clerk and the deputy clerk. And I had wanted to be there, and they were like, you know what, we can meet, even if you're not here, it'll be fine. And that is a far cry from where we were 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I would agree. I think we've taken the documents, Pat, from the municipal code and the statutory duties, tried to align those, what we're arriving at now, what we're trying to arrive at is a document, like, as I said earlier, that everybody can live with. In building trust, rebuilding that trust is important, and I think we're making some progress there, too. So I would respectfully say that I don't think we are where we certainly are where I'd like to be, but we're certainly in a position where we're better than we were 2 weeks ago.
We're not on the
In my
front page of the
opinion.
news anymore.
I beg your pardon?
Well, tomorrow.
No, we're not on the front page of the news anymore with this relationship, and I think that's the biggest difference, that we're not done, and we're not where we need to be, but we will get there, and we're working on it, and we're not doing it overnight in a rushed fashion.
Alderman Verbeek.
Thank you, Councilmember Morris, for your time and energy putting into this beyond, I think, the call of duty. So it's very much appreciated. For me, the struggle is FTE, full-time equivalency. And we've heard the clerk talk about this evening, 10 hours per week. And in my book, that's a .25 FTE. So what I'm really struggling with, and those I represent are really struggling with, is then Ruth performing the .75. Is that how we get 1 FTE? You're suggesting a full-time clerk. So since the full-time clerk could not always be present necessarily, you'd have to have somebody in case of vacation or sickness or whatnot. So then perhaps you're suggesting it's a 1.5 FTE or 1.25 FTE. But I'm looking through all of these duties, and I'm trying to add up the time, and it's just not adding up to 1 FTE. So please help me out, somebody.
Mayor, may I say something?
Absolutely.
I have a front row seat every day of the week to the work that goes into the issuance of a license. It isn't just about the seal, that's sort of the icing on the cake. There are hours of work that go, take a liquor license, for instance. There are background checks, there's coordination with the police department. There's coordination back and forth with the applicant. And there's information and forms to be filled out and so forth. Who's done that for the last 5 years? It's not the city clerk. It's Ruth Scott. There's only been one clerk really consistently talking about FTEs of at least .75 for the last 5 years. That's been Ruth Scott. But we have a clerk. And in respect to the position, we're going to have a clerk until the voters decide that there isn't a clerk. So in that context, with a clerk coming in 8, now maybe 10 hours a week, 0.25, or whatever it is, it's a fraction. How do we get business done? Which gets to Alderman Fagan's point. We had a system that works and it can work again. Who can doubt Ruth Scott's responsibilities and accountability? Who can literally do that? She has carried the ball for us. Have you had any complaints about the work she's done with the issuance of licenses, the collaboration with people, sometimes agreeable, sometimes not, who come in, sometimes they don't know the system, and sometimes they think they can just come and get a license, and Ruth has to, in detail and very calmly, explain what the system is. The clerk isn't here to do that. So now you want to add on to the people's budget another, basically a position to do what's already being done. I think we divide the duties. The duties were divided pretty well, and you would follow the state statute, which says, not what a clerk says, it what the state statute says. The legislature says that that seal can be affixed by anybody you say. You're the sovereign authority here. This is not a council, manager, clerk form of government. If it is, it's the only one I know of. It's a council, manager form of government. I'm happy to stay out of it. I haven't had to do anything in it until Ruth couldn't get the seal. Now we're on the headlines again. People, I heard every day, people coming up, when am I going to get this done? Well, I can't get the seal. And Ruth had to be in the position, the awkward and embarrassing and frustrating position of trying to be diplomatic and kind and friendly and put the best face on a bad situation. We're kicking the can down the road here. I think it's time to make some decisions. Bring back something that you can look at, vote up or down.
That is our charge. That is our charge, Carolyn.
Can I note one last thing that speaks very much to this FTE question that you posed? So as we discussed this on Friday, this concept, we recognized that if we were to suddenly make the clerk's office, this is a bag of duties, and the duties have been distributed in a way that has decreased the amount of work for the clerk's office to make it manageable on the salary that it receives. Part of doing that was shifting those duties to other offices. And so we recognize that we've already, cut a great number of offices and a great number of leaders. And so we're not talking about, trying to create another employee, but we want to make sure. So in our discussions, we realized that we do need to shift some of these duties so that the clerk, and if this is such an issue, the way it is, it sounds like we need more feedback from the community as to whether they want a full-time clerk or a part-time clerk, because it seems clear through the previous referendum that they've made clear that they want an elected clerk. But we do need to know from the community, do they want that elected clerk full-time or part-time? And I think if we know whether or not they want it to be full-time or part-time, then we can know whether or not we need to be allocating more duties to that job and more resources to that job. And I think that we can find, as we add the duties, the resources can be found just as easily. And it'll just be a shift of responsibilities that balances out in the end.
We're going to work hard to come up with something, unless there's another comment from council. Alderman Verbeek.
Well, I'm just looking for whoever can help me with the justification that it's more than 20 hours per week of work.
The FOIA requests were shifted to another role, and those take 20 to 25 hours a week alone, I've been told. I'm not suggesting eliminating that responsibility from the other person's job that it became, but looking at all of the responsibilities, it's clear that we can shift responsibilities back toward the clerk's role as perhaps someone else retires or leaves.
We have three or four folks who would like to speak to this. I think we've pretty much tossed this around as best we can tonight, keeping in mind that the mission is not accomplished yet. So, the first speaker who would like to speak is a very distinguished individual, our former city clerk of many, many years ago, but we go back many, many years, and that's Peggy Hoyt. And Peggy, I'm going to respectfully ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
You know, I'm very confused. There's too much that isn't clear to me. But I will say, when I spoke to you this afternoon, that there are a couple of items that I want to mention. And the one thing is, if you remember, for about 30 years, Donna Johnson and I were the clerks with no problems. Thank God. But that hasn't happened here. But I do think, and I believe that our forefathers, when they created the position of city clerk, wanted, because it was elected, I think they wanted it to be full-time, that the clerk would have the office full-time with hours, because after all, the clerk is the protector of all documents of the city. Not that the clerk has to have them in the office, but have them recorded in a book and accessible when needed. The other item I want to impress on you is that the city clerk, in my opinion, must name the deputy clerk. And the deputy clerk is really hooked at the waist with her, because she is her backup and she takes orders from her. I can't speak to many of the other items because they're in flux. So I guess I'll have to come to another meeting.
Thank you, Peggy. J.J. Wett, and J.J.'s back here. Ray, J.J., you want to come forward, or do you want the mic taken back to you? Okay.
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I just want to thank you for hearing me tonight. I think the biggest question when it comes to the clerk's office is who's in charge? It's the leadership. A leader bears the brunt, the workload, not the employees under them. A leader arrives before the employees and stays after the employees leave. A leader takes responsibility for mistakes and fixes them. As the clinical director across the street at the Youth Service Bureau, I fully understand this. I have several employees underneath me. However, under the current limitations of the city clerk position, it's impossible for the clerk to be a leader. That's why we need a full-time elected clerk. Council should consider the funding for the department and bring it back to the level it once was, where the office was responsible for many of the day-to-day functions at City Hall. In other words, council should restore the city clerk's office as the independent force it once was, so that City Hall can move towards functioning more effectively effectively and economically. Thank you.
Thank you, JJ, appreciate it. One final speaker, Bessie Chronopoulos, our former mayor.
Thank you, council, first of all, for hearing this and finally discussing this very important issue. And thank you to Alderman Morris for taking such a wonderful leadership role. In hearing some of the previous speakers, and I understand what you're saying, Alderman Fagan and Alderman Verbeek, you know, the financial ends of it. There's a misunderstanding of what the clerk's office is all about. Because for the last 7 years or so, we haven't really had a clerk's office. It's been dispersed all over the place. At one point in time, there was not only a full-time clerk and a full-time deputy, but if I'm not mistaken, at times there was a part-time deputy as well, because that office was a central location for licenses, permits, FOIA. The folks across the street who had to get the seals or signatures or verifications for plats and projects as development was coming through, that all had to go through the clerk's office. They were a very busy office. So by reinstating and restoring the clerk's position to where it once was, instead of having things all over the place, you would centralize the activities, you would make it very efficient, and it would also be economical. You wouldn't be adding any more to the budget. You wouldn't be taking away a snowplow person or a firefighter or a police person or anything like that at all. That needs to be restructured to back where it once was. And then the other thing that needs to be done is you need to realign the code so it'll line up with the state statutes. Because the city attorney, past one, managed to tweak the code quite a bit to the point of where it's not very clear. And that's a no-no. That should not be. And folks have made it very clear as to the fact that they want an elected clerk. It's simple as that. And everything will work out just fine. An independent clerk who's there to do all of those duties and to double check. And as Mr. Donahue, is it? He mentioned, like, if there was some kind of a document that came through the clerk's office that it was going to be okay. Well, what if there was something wrong in that document that the clerk spotted that maybe nobody else spotted? The clerk would say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't quite right. That's like a nice little fail-safe mechanism that's there. And the clerk has not only every right to do it, but an obligation to do that. And that's partly why the system had worked for so many years before. It does not need to be contentious. And Bill, nobody is saying that Ruth has not been doing a good job. It's a matter of how that thing is, how the job is structured and whose jurisdiction the deputy comes under. It's as simple as that. So, council, I'm glad that you seem to be on the right track. Just keep talking about it. It'll come through. It'll all work out. Just restore the city clerk to where it once was.
Thank you, Bessie.
Yep.
Unless there are any other closing comments, yes, Alderman Faber.
So, thank you for your comments. You know, the previous referendum was, should the city manager appoint a clerk? And I'm sure if that was on the agenda again, several people would come out. They would say, no, the city manager should not be the one appointing the clerk. If we're talking about an appointed clerk, I think it should be the council members that appoint a clerk, but that's not on the docket tonight. Talking about best practices, over 65% of municipalities in Illinois no longer have a clerk. So with computerization, with other efficiencies of working with other departments within the city, they didn't see the need to keep a municipal clerk, and they've gone away from having a municipal clerk. I would offer up we should consider the same as well. We should have that discussion. The other point I wanted to make, it was mentioned that we've gutted and destroyed the city clerk's position. As a home rule municipality, we can exercise any power and perform any function unless it's specifically prohibited from doing so by state law. And that's what was done to the clerk position, was to bring it up to speed, to bring it to make it more efficient, to get work done, because it wasn't working the way it was. We've changed things. We're not going backwards, we're going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Fagan.
One quick thing I want to say, and in all due respect, Peggy, you did an excellent job. You did an excellent job. After that, Donna Johnson did an excellent job. That department was busy, and you were busy, because I remember working here at the time when you were there. Bessie brings up about across the street, and Platt's done and everything like that. Yeah, well, there's nobody across the street anymore. Things change. And I just want to say, I'm not taking anything away. And you know, you and Donna did an excellent job, and you did such a good job that that pay kept going up to, and I think it ended up at $65,000 when Donna left. And I don't think we gutted that. I mean, I think that the system gutted itself when an elected official came in and the whole thing collapsed. Alderman Favor has brought up a valid point where we are home rule. But we also can't take advantage of that either. But we have to also look at it from a point of things change and the way of doing business has changed. And people don't want to wait. I don't care where you're at. I mean, if you're sitting in the drive-through at 5 minutes and it's taking that long, people get upset. If they come in here and can't get their permit signed, sealed, when they can, or they should be, and the town next door can. And the other thing is, one more thing that I haven't brought up is we don't need any more government. We really don't. And the people that voted us in trust us, hopefully, and we make the decisions. We made the decision to hire the city manager. We feel that the city manager wasn't doing a good job. We let the city manager go. But, like I said, things change, and we have to change along with that. That's all.
Thank you. Alderman Morris.
I just want to make one last point. You know,
Promise?
I promise. He said we don't need any more government. And I think that one of the struggles of this city is that none of our roles, none of our elected roles are full-time. All of these positions are part-time positions. What that means is that the people who do, like, I'm lucky that I had the opportunity to spend extra time on this over the past couple of weeks because I'm not fully employed right now. Not everyone can afford to do that. And what that means is if I get a full-time job next week, I'm not here to help in that way. And most of the people on the council are not able to devote that amount of time to this. And the mayor gets paid the most, but he's still paid a part-time salary. What that means and what the community sometimes does not understand is that because not a single one of our elected officials is a full-time employee, we fail to have any check or balance on the city manager's office. We are stuck in a position where, we chose the city manager, he's an amazing city manager, and we are lucky to have him. But the difficulty there is that none of us have the opportunity to lead. And our mayor is an amazing mayor who puts in full-time hours as well, but not everyone has that opportunity either. So I think that some role needs to have more of a role than it does that is elected.
Mayor, may I just say something? Thank you very much, Alderman
Yeah.
Morris. And it's absolutely true that you're doing everything you can with the limited time you have, and same with everybody else sitting up here. But I guess I have to say this in behalf of city managers and council manager form of government everywhere. The big check you have that the community has against a rogue city manager is the fact that with just 48 hours notice on the basis of what our state statute says, you can remove the city manager any week, any justified advertised meeting. You don't need any more balance
It's a
than
check,
that.
but
May
no
I
one-
please finish?
Sorry.
What you don't have a check on is a person who's elected for 4 years and by statute only has to show up to get sworn in. That's the truth. That is the truth, and you know it's the truth. I just wanted to put to rest this idea. We have to balance the city manager's role. You can do it next meeting if you want.
Sure. And that's a check, but if no one has the time to look into it thoroughly and adequately enough to verify that all the ducks are in a row, no one can say up here, not one of us has the time to check enough to sit here and say something was done wrong. And I do think maybe we should have shorter terms, because 4 years is a long time to have people in this role.
Mayor,
Alderman Favor.
the minimum qualification for a clerk is 21 years of age. I'm older than 21 years old. It took me 6 months to learn all the in and out. I don't even know them today, all the ins and outs of the city. A clerk isn't going to come in and do that, number one. Number two, I don't want a clerk to have that much authority where they could stop city business. I could come in and say, I don't like the next development coming into DeKalb. I have to convince 7 other people. I don't want a clerk who can stop a permit that we've all approved on that basis of their disapproval of something. I don't think that's correct. That's not what the statute says that the city clerk's role is. That is not what her role should be, or the clerk's role should be. It's not a check and a balance like that, no.
Can we set qualifications for our clerk?
There are 3, 21 years of age or older, resident of the city of DeKalb, in our case, and shall not have been convicted of a felony.
So we can't add anything to that legally?
No, we can't.
That's a state statute.
Right, but as a
Home rule community, we could
can-
add as much as we want.
We can add anything to our
That's correct.
elected.
You just have to be careful, because in our democracy, there's a reason why
Right.
we don't expect criteria for what it takes to vote, right? And we expect the same openness to be applied to our elected officials. And I strongly support that, because we have a history in our country over the last 100 years of poll taxes. You couldn't vote because you didn't know enough American history, or you didn't pay a tax somewhere along the way. And it's the same logic if you require that your city clerk have a bachelor's degree or some grounding in civics or the rest. So although it's minimal, and absolutely is, if you're going to have an elected position, you're kind of stuck with that if you want to be democratic.
We did come across the concept in our discussions that putting the duties out there clearly and sharing the duties publicly so that whoever ran for the office knew what those duties entailed, that would help to find more qualified people, because they would know whether or not they were qualified for the job.
I'd entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting of the Committee of the Whole.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn this meeting of the Committee of the Whole. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? We are adjourned. City Council meeting, and for those who have been waiting for our City Council meeting, I apologize for this lengthy COW, but it's something that we needed to discuss on 2 very, very important items. We will begin the City Council meeting for the City of DeKalb at 10 minutes to 7. That's 10 minutes to 7. Thank you.